Introduction. Introduction involves the definition of fuel. The things that we are going to study about fuel. Fuel is basically a substance containing carbon as the major constituent or substituent which provides energy on combustion for domestic as well as for industrial purposes. We all know that the substances which contain carbon chain or which contain carbon can be basically the type or can be utilized for energy production, because when carbon-carbon bond breaks, at that time it gives us energy. So in general, by combustion or by any other means, when we break the carbon, at that time it gives us, or when we break the carbon chain, it gives us certain kind of energy. So we are going to study about that particular substance which is known as fuel. Fuel is basically a particular kind of substance. Okay, it contains carbons. Some contains a very high number of carbon, some contains very low number of carbon, but it contains carbon in such a proportion that when it is combusted, at that time it gives us an energy, and we utilize that energy to move or to carry on certain works. Okay, now after learning the definition of fuel, what we need to understand is what is a combustion, right? What is this word means, which is combustion? So combustion is the process of oxidation that provides heat, that provides energy. So in simple manner, a heat, energy. Every combustion is generally an oxidation, but every oxidation is not a combustion process, right? Understood it here properly. Each and every combustion occurs under the influence of oxygen, but the processes which occurs under the influence of oxygen will not be always combustion. Okay, for an example, combustion of wood, combustion of petrol, combustion of kerosene gives us heat energy. Right? These are the simple examples that we can utilize them. Okay. Now, let's take a look on classification of fuels. We came across different types of fuels, different types of even the applications of fuels. But exactly what is the classification of fuel? So we can do the classification of fuel on the basis of two different things. Number one, our first criteria that we have to use here is occurrence. Okay, or preparation. Depending upon the preparation, we can classify the fuel. Depending upon the occurrence, we can classify the fuel. Similar way, we have aggregation or state of aggregation. In which state of aggregation does we obtain our fuel? On that basis, we can classify our fuel. Okay? Let's take a look on them one by one. First one is classification of fuel on the basis of occurrence. Okay, on the basis of occurrence means how it occurs. So depending upon that, we can classify them into two different parts. First part is natural or primary fuel. Second part is artificial or secondary fuel. So in general, two types are there. Number one, natural. Number two, artificial. We can call natural as a primary one, and we can know an artificial as the secondary one. Right? This is the basic meaning of it. Now, let's take a look on them in detail. First is a natural one. As the name itself suggests, natural fuel means the fuel which occurs in the nature or which naturally which is available naturally. Okay, so the fuels which are found in nature or which has availability in the nature very easily is known as natural fuel or primary fuel. Okay, for an example wood, for an example peat, coal, etc. We can take an example of petroleum gases. We can take an example of natural gases also. These are the things which are available naturally or which occurs naturally. We need not to make them. We need not to manufacture them. Okay. This is the meaning of this natural or primary fuel. Second is artificial or secondary fuel. What is the meaning of this? So, the fuels which are prepared artificially from the primary fuels are known as artificial fuel or secondary fuel. Right? The fuel which is available artificially or which are produced or manufactured artificially from the primary fuels is known as artificial fuel or secondary fuel. Let's take an example of it. So we can have an example of charcoal, coke, kerosene, diesel, petrol, coal gas, oil gas and producer gases. Right? We can take a look on furnace gases also. They are produced artificially from the primary fuel or they are produced artificially from any process, right? That is known as artificial or secondary fuel. Now, these are the meaning of what you understand by this classification. Okay. On classification of fuel on the basis of state of aggregation. State of aggregation means how it is aggregated. Right? So depending upon that, we can classify them into three different types. Number one, solid fuels. Number two, liquid fuels. And number three, gaseous fuels. Right? Depending upon the state, we can classify solid, liquid and gas. So here it's solid fuel, liquid fuel and gaseous fuel. Okay? Now, after deciding that what is the actual meaning of artificial fuel, what is the actual meaning of natural fuel, how we can get an idea that this is an artificial one and this is a primary one. Okay? So, we have put a table with which we can study that. Here, in that particular PPT, you can see that we have divided into three different columns. First is types of fuel, second one is natural or primary fuel, and third one is artificial or secondary fuel. So type of fuel gives you the state. So first state is solid. Okay. So in solid, we can take an example of natural, which is wood, peat, lignite, cow dung, bituminous coal and anthracite coal. They are naturally available fuels. Right? We need not to manufacture them. Then another one, we have artificial or secondary fuel. So it involves charcoal and coke. Okay, it's not coke, it's coke. Fine? Now, let's move ahead to the liquid one. When we talk about the liquid one, in natural, we can take an example of crude oil. Crude oil is generally naturally available and from which we produce different types of fuels. Okay. If we talk about artificial or which are the products we obtain From crude oil, we can take an example of petrol, diesel, various other fractions of petroleum which are available. Okay. Last but not the least, the gaseous fuel. So gaseous fuel, generally when we talk about natural one, natural gas is involved, and when we talk about artificial ones, then coal gas, oil gas, biogas, water gas, furnace gases are available into it. These are the basic examples that how we can classify the fuels depending upon their availability, depending upon their state, depending upon their applications, right? We have another things also, but these are the main types of fuels and these are the main classification of that particular kind of fuel. This is all for this session. Next, we will see in our next session. Thank you so much, everyone.